Hey, how's it going? I'm Matt, and today we are talking about gates. Not Kevin Gates, but noise gates. Specifically, the silencer gate from Black Salt Audio. Just a quick disclaimer, this is a plugin I bought with my own money. I got the free trial, I liked it, I paid for it. I have not been in contact with the company at all. So before we get into it, what is a gate? A gate, like a lot of other audio tools, is just a style of volume control. So what you're doing with a gate is you're setting a threshold, right? You're putting a line and you are saying, any sound loud enough to cross this threshold, we will hear, right? But any sound that is not loud enough to approach this threshold will be turned down, so we don't hear it. There are a lot of times where noise gates can be really practical and helpful. One of them can be, say you are recording vocals and you are in a room where there's an air conditioner, or there is a fan, or a noisy hard drive, or a MacBook Pro, God forbid, and there's something that's just making noise in the background while someone is trying to sing. Now, most times there's that underlying kind of low bed of that noise that's going on in the background, but the vocal is going to be louder on your meter, right? Because the vocal is closer to the microphone. So here's the level of my noise. I'm going to put the gate threshold here, and the vocal is still going to pop up. It's still going to get past that threshold, get past your gate, but it will turn down all of that background noise, and now that won't be affecting your mix and ruining your song. Another common instance for gates is drum recording and mixing. When you're recording drums, you have a lot of things that are really loud, very close to each other. And when you're trying to get isolated sounds of these, you're going to get bleed. It is pretty much inevitable. Mic placement is, of course, a very big part of this, but a lot of times you're still going to get bleed. For that reason, gates can really help you out because you can isolate the sound that you're trying to work on. You can say, that low level of hi-hat that's bleeding in, turn it down, only my snare drum gets through, now I can really listen to what I'm doing. Last week I was working on a mix, I was going through the drums, and I was just getting a lot of hi-hat bleed in my snare drum mic. It was killing me. I just couldn't find a way to gate that out without killing the life of the snare drum. I was just really struggling to do it. I had heard about the silencer gate, and I wanted to try it out. I got the demo. I wanted to commit that for printing the mix, so I bought it. I really liked it. It's simple to use. It worked great on the drums. It solved the problems I needed it to. And I just wanted to make a video going through it because I think it's fun. So now we're gonna hop into a mix, we're gonna check it out, and I'm gonna show you how I used it. All right, so here I am in Pro Tools, and I have my drums. Just so you know what's going on here, all these tracks here with audio on them are my drum tracks. They are feeding into this drums folder, which is just a bus for all my drums. Inside that, I have two subfolders. One is the kick, which is all of my kick drum microphones summed to one folder, and a snare drum one, which is my two snare drum microphones, again, summed to one folder, so I can affect the snare drum all at once without having to do stuff to individual microphones. So I'll just give you a quick example of what this all sounds like unaffected. So that's what our drums sound like. So now we're gonna look at things a little closer with our silencer gate. Now the first place I wanna take a look at is my snare top microphone. So on my snare drum, I have a microphone looking at the top of the drum, and I have a microphone looking at the bottom of the drum, getting the snares underneath. Here's my top snare drum microphone. So this is our snare drum, right? You can see these big transients are the snare drum hits, and you can see some little ones which are the bleed from mostly the hi-hat. So as we get down the line in a mix, that bleed still can come out in bigger ways. I'm going to show you an example of that. So here we have the SSL channel, and say I wanted to boost a little bit around 6-7K on the top of this snare drum, right? I want to bring out a little more snap, a little more high end. Let's listen to what happens. So our snare drum gets brighter, but our hi-hat gets louder, and that can be a problem, right? I don't want to affect the hi-hat, I want to affect my snare drum. And I don't want my balance between my drums to change because I am boosting something on the snare. So this is where the gate comes in. So I'm going to take that off. So now we're going to use the silencer on the snare top. This thing is really made for drums. Up top, you can click around and tell it what kind of drum microphone we're looking at, right? So we're going to tell it snare top because that's what we're doing. And we're going to play with this on. Now I'm killing all of that bleed by just adjusting this gate. So I'm going to show you how I dialed this in. So over here, you have the threshold control. Now where I've placed it is just above where all of those little transients that tend to be the hi-hat and things like that come in, but it's still way beneath where those snare drum hits come in. So my snare drum comes in, you hear it, then it turns down everything else. So first we have our reduction control, which is just saying how much are we pulling down the unwanted signals beneath our threshold. I'm pulling them down quite a bit. It's working for me, sounds good. Next we have our big D-bleed knob in the middle here. This one is reducing the high-end bleed information. So even though we have our reduction knob, we're getting rid of stuff underneath the threshold, there still might be some extra bleed. So this is specifically trying to get rid of like cymbal bleed in your drum microphones. So if I turn it all the way back to -100, we have a little more high end in the snare drum, but we have more cymbal in there too. You push it all the way to +100, you are getting rid of a lot of those cymbals, but you're getting rid of some high end on your snare drum too. So for me, the sweet spot was somewhere around 30-40%. Then we have our length control on the right here. Think of this as your release if you've worked with other gates before. It's essentially how long are the transients that get through the gate, right? So that it doesn't just pull down right after they hit. If you want a little more ring, a little more sustain on, say, a tom or a snare drum, you can dial this up or you can dial it back. If you have it too short, you'll get all that snap, but it doesn't really sound like a snare drum. It sounds a little unnatural. It doesn't ring out as long as the drum actually rings out. So you want to dial it to somewhere where you're getting the right sustain of your drum, but you're not letting it go so long that some more bleed gets in. Now they also have a ghost note button down here on the left. If your drummer was playing a lot of ghost notes, a little kind of small stuff that may inch around where the threshold is, or maybe even a little bit below it, this is trying to compensate for that. My drummer wasn't doing a lot of that, so I'm not using it on this mix. Finally, you have your output to the side over here. I'm keeping mine at 0. And so here's a before and after with this gate. So it's clearing a lot of that bleed. We're getting rid of a lot of the cymbals. Now, as I work on the snare drum, I'm just working on the snare drum. So now I have the SSL channel back up. Now this is after the gate, right? And so now I can push that high end at the same spot, but I'm just going to be boosting it on the snare drum because we've cleared the cymbals out of the way. So that makes things super helpful as you go on with the mix because you're clearing space and you're only affecting the things you want to affect. So after that, I put the same thing on the bottom snare drum. Very similar process. You go up top, you click that it's the snare bottom microphone, you go through your threshold, your reduction, your D-bleed, your length. So here's a before. And after. So again, we're clearing stuff out of the way, though it's not super aggressive in the source just by itself. Once you start adding compression, EQ, these bleed problems can come out more. So I'm just getting rid of them as early as I can, and that way I can move forward and not worry about them popping back up later. So here's our blended snare drum before and after the silencer. Now I'm going to show you an example of how compression would have affected this problem. So now I have my snare drum, I have it blended, I have it gated, and I have a little bit of that EQ on the top snare drum. I am going to compress the blended snare drum a little bit. Here's no compression on the snare. And here it is with compression. So we're getting a little more aggression, we're getting a little more snap out of that snare drum. It's sounding good. Now let's see the difference if I would have had the same amount of compression but had not gated the snares. As you probably know, what a compressor is doing is it's saying anything over a threshold gets pulled down. But what that does is it brings your louder and your quieter sounds a little bit closer together, or a lot closer together depending on how hard you compress. That's going to bring out more bleed. So we get rid of our bleed before the compressor, and we don't have that problem down the line. So for my kick drum, things worked a little bit differently. I had 3 microphones on the kick, and instead of putting the gate on each microphone, I put the gate on the summed combination of those microphones. So here's my kick drum sound, not gated. And here's my kick drum gated. Now, once again, not a lot of bleed in this, so it wasn't a huge problem, but it was nice to be able to just dial in something quick with the silencer here. So let's just do another test with our compression. So compressor without the gate. Compressor with the gate. A lot less bleed coming through, and as we move through the mix, we're gonna have less problems. Another place I used the silencer was my tom microphones. So here's a little snippet of one of my drum fills, and you can see that there's a little bit of signal down here, and then the big transient where the drums come in. Not a lot of bleed, but same concept. If I'm gonna bring in more compression or more EQ later, that stuff might come out. We wanna kill it. Now, this is the gate on my high tom here. Super simple. Adjusted my threshold so it could get over. I have a little bit of a longer length on these drums because I want that sustain to come out of the toms, but then I want it to stop after that. I really like the visualizer on this thing. It helps me kind of see what I'm doing with the threshold. Some other gates, I've just struggled with getting the threshold and the attack and release kind of dialed in just right. And this one feels like it just gets there fast, so I like it. I will say normally with toms, especially on a track like this where there's not a lot of fills, I would just cut out everything else. I wouldn't even bother to gate it. It just takes a little bit more time and a little bit more CPU to gate all this stuff. And if I know that I can just go in there, cut the stuff, put the fades where I want them, I won't usually bother. But for this mix, I tried out the silencer because I wanted to see how it works. And it works great on the toms. It made it easy. Again, I was able to just move quickly, knock it out, move on to the next thing. So here are how my drums sound when I put all of my processing back on. Now I'm going to play through the drums again, but I'm going to toggle the gate on and off on the snare drum microphones. Specifically listen to the hi-hat and see what difference this makes. It really changes the balance of the drums. If I didn't have those gates, I would be fighting with that snare drum. I'd be trying to make more compromises on snare drum EQ and compression based on what that hi-hat is doing in that microphone. So now I can cut all the stuff away before I start affecting everything, and then I can build my drum kit up without all that bleed, without making those compromises. So that's the kind of impact that a gate can have as you make your way through a mix. Some things that may not seem like huge problems in the beginning can become larger problems as you kind of compress stuff, EQ things, mix everything together. It's just nice to be able to clear those problems out and only work on the things you want to work on. The thing I really like about the silencer gate in particular is that it's quick and it's easy to use. That for me is the biggest sell. I like to be able to just move past my gating and get onto the fun part of a mix. You know, get my cleanup done so I can do the creative stuff. My recommendation for anyone curious about this plugin would just be to go to the company's website, get the free trial like I did, and if it works with how you like to do things, then maybe buy it. But I personally really like it. I'm glad I bought it. It's been helpful on this mix. It will probably be helpful on future mixes. Again, quick, get stuff done, get on to the fun parts.